here. I think this is getting kind of messy. We had all of this code down here that was printing out our coded message from the first section, and now we have this new block of code up here that's turning a coded message back into readable text. So these are doing kind of the opposite of each other. And what I'd like to do is just kind of store them in a way that makes them easier to reuse rather than having to copy and paste things all the time. So this block of code down here that prints out the alphabet and then prints out our coded message, what it's really doing is it's taking in a readable message and printing out an encoded message. So this is actually what we call encoding a given message. What I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap all of this inside what we call a function. And functions just allow you to reuse the same piece of code again and again, which makes sense because we might want to encode many different messages. We don't want to have to reuse, we don't want to have to type out this code each time. So to define a function, I'm going to say define a function, and you now have to name the function, and it can be any name you like. I'm going to call it encode. And then we have to tell the function, well, what are you going to receive? What are you going to be given to encode? And the answer is it will be given a message. And then we add a colon at the end, which means everything that comes after this line has to be indented. So I'm going to select all of this, and I'm going to indent this if I can. I think you have to do this one line at a time, unfortunately. So 4 gets indented once, these ones get indented, this one gets indented, they all just jump right in there. And I think that looks pretty good. So now, this encode function, whenever I want to encode something, I can now just write the line encode and feed in any message I like. And if you remember, the message was written right up here, so I'm just going to use the word message. I'm going to say encode. Let's change the name of this. Let's call it my message. My message. And I'm going to say encode my message. And that should be it. That's enough. And we run, and absolutely nothing changes because it still just works. But it's nice because now I can tell it to encode anything. I can say encode hello, run. I can tell it to encode any string I like, and it's very, very convenient just to be able to type it in right there. So let's do the same thing. Let's do the same thing for our decoding function up here. So I'm going to define a new function, def, and I'm going to give this function a name, which is going to be decode. And this time it's going to receive a coded message. Coded message, colon, and we have to indent everything. And so let's make sure we've got everything we need here. So we're going to tell it to decode some coded message. And remember, that coded message is just a big old string. And we took that coded message, we split it into a list, got our result ready, an empty string, and then we went through every single line in that message, in that coded message. And for each line we looked for the @ symbol, and when we found it, we went over to our alphabet and said, hey, what letter is in that location, and then added that to our result. Let me test this. So if I was to do decode, well, let's try decode the coded message. Coded message. And let's run that. And we're all good. It's behaving itself. And remember, if I don't call this function, if I just comment that out and run again, it doesn't print it. So we can see that both of these functions are working perfectly right, and I can get rid of them, and my code now does nothing, because this code is sitting here, but it's not actually being called. it's not being used for anything. It's just sitting there ready to be used, but it's not actually it's not being used. Now, just to finish up this thought before we finish, whenever you define a function, we've just told this function to do some stuff. It takes an input, does some stuff with it, prints out a result. But functions can actually hand you back the result. We don't need to print it out. We could just give it back by doing this. I'm going to say I return the result that I found. And this is kind of interesting because if I call decode this time, you see it doesn't actually print out. I'm going to get rid of this code as well because I don't want that. You see that even though I'm calling decode here, even though I'm calling it, I'm actually not getting an answer. And that's because now it's just returning its result, but I'm not doing anything with it. So what I would need to do is say something like the answer equals decode, coded message, and then print the answer. If I do that, I get my result again. Sometimes this might be useful if you want to be able to store your results. And I'm going to do the same thing. I know some of you have done some Python before, so if you have, you should be able to do the same thing for this encode function down here. Instead of printing out a result, we should be able to get it to just save those as a string and then return them. We're going to have to do something like what we did up here, where we start with an empty string and we add things to it. So this might be a good moment to pause the video and have a go at doing that yourself. I'm just going to keep going. So I'm going to say again, my result equals an empty string. And then, as we go, rather than printing these things, I'm going to add them to them. And I should say, by the way, you see how I did up here, I did result equals result plus a new thing. There's a much nicer way of writing that. You can just use this plus equals operator, and that just appends this to the end of the result. It's a much nicer way of writing it. So I'm going to do the same thing down here. I've got a result, empty string, and I'm just going to start appending things to it. So instead of printing out an empty line, I'm going to do result plus equals an empty line, or I'm going to do result plus equals all of this, and then I have to return it. Return result. And this time I have to store my answer in a variable that I'm calling answer. So I call encode, store that result, and then print it. Let me see if that works. So instead of doing my decode thing, I'm now going to do my encode and see if that works. And sort of. It sort of works. You see there's a problem here. It's just given me this enormous long chain of characters. What's going on there? Why is it doing that? Well, it's because I haven't included any new lines. Remember, we had this thing in this message. The reason it's split over multiple lines is because there's an invisible character that you can't see here called a new line that tells the computer to finish this line and start again down here. And so I need to actually incorporate a new line onto the end of each of these lines. And the way you do that is I'm just going to do plus quote marks, and to do a new line, you type \n. And you won't be able to see this in your output, it'll just cause it to create a new line. So let's see what happens there if we hit run.